So, good evening, everybody. Let's start with our motivation. And since we've been discussing impermanence in this teaching the last few weeks, reflect on the fact that everything is changing in each moment, never remaining the same. And when we get a sense of that change is the nature of our body and mind and the nature of everything around us, then it makes us reflect on our lives and how does this awareness of impermanence, how can it affect our lives in a useful way? And one way is by seeing that there is nothing to be attached to because it is changing. And so to give up attachment, clinging. And also, since everything is changing, then kindness is a good policy. Rather than rely on things being the same, let's create the cause for goodness, since things are changing in every moment. And kindness, compassion are excellent causes of goodness. So with a determination not to be attached to anything in cyclic existence, but to be kind and compassionate to everyone we encounter. Then let's listen to Aryadeva's text with the motivation of becoming the most kind, the most compassionate, the wisest. In other words, by becoming a fully awakened Buddha ourselves for the benefit of all beings. So let's cultivate that motivation for being together. So we've been studying Aryadeva's text, the 400 stanzas, and chapter 9 deals with refuting permanent functional things, and chapter 10 with refuting a permanent self. Yeah. So in these two chapters, there's a great emphasis on things being impermanent, on them being transient. And this is in the Lam Rim, one of the very important meditations. They say if you forget impermanence and by extension death in the morning, then you waste the morning. If you forget them in the afternoon, then you waste the afternoon. If you forget them in the evening, then you waste the night. Yeah. So for many people, reflecting on impermanence is not their favorite topic. You know, it brings a feeling of insecurity, like you're falling through space and wondering where you're going to land, because in each moment, what was is no longer, and you don't know what is going to come into existence. So for some people, reflecting on impermanence brings a feeling of insecurity, or perhaps fear, something like that. For Dharma practitioners, we're really taught how to do this meditation so that it helps our spiritual practice. And when we reflect on impermanence, instead of feeling insecure and afraid, to think, oh, my present opportunity, which is very precious, my present life, which is so precious and useful, is not going to last forever. It's disintegrating in each moment. Therefore, I should use it in a good way. I shouldn't waste my time. And so that awareness of impermanence actually makes our life more vibrant, because we're aware that time is limited, time is precious, and so we want to really live fully in a meaningful way. So then, what is a meaningful way to live? Now, when I was meditating just now, I was thinking of this one story. I heard it in Buddhist circles first. First, not in Tibetan Buddhist circles. I don't know if it was Zen or whatever it was. So I'm not quite sure if it's a Buddhist story. Maybe some of you will know. But the way I heard it and the way it was interpreted, I always thought was quite odd. And then recently, I found a version of the story in the Tibetan tradition that seemed much more applicable to me. Okay, so the story, many of you may have heard it, is about this man who's running along the edge of a cliff and is being chased by a monster, and and he's running along the edge of the cliff, and he slips and starts falling over the edge of the cliff. So he grasps onto a branch that's coming out the side of the edge of the cliff, and he's holding onto that branch for dear life because it's a long way down. And at the same time, there's a mouse chewing on the branch that he's holding onto. Yeah, so imagine his state of mind. And then he sees a strawberry growing out of the cliff. And so the way that I first heard the story was he picked the strawberry and said, "How beautiful, how delicious," and ate the strawberry completely in the present moment, enjoying the strawberry fully. And the way I heard that story was that was an example of how we should be in the present moment, of really enjoying everything fully and not involved in our worries and our fears. Have you heard the story interpreted that way? Yeah, that's a very popular way of interpreting it. And I always went, I don't get it. If I were in that situation, what use is tasting a strawberry? Even if I enjoyed it and it brought me so much bliss, the fact that it was all going to be over pretty soon, what use was that happiness and that bliss? I thought, what does this story mean? That's not, when I think of being in the present moment, that's not how I think of being in the present moment, by fully enjoying my sense pleasure. Yeah, because ever since I was a kid, I've always had this feeling of, yeah, you enjoy something, but then it's gone. So what use was it? Yeah. I was kind of spoiled when I was a kid, and my parents, I remember one year had a birthday party for me. I can't remember how old I was. And I had so much fun at the birthday party. And in the evening, after the party was over, there was one little space in my room, you know, kind of narrow space, and I went there and I cried and sobbed and sobbed and sobbed. And my parents are going, "Oh, wait, didn't you have a good time at the party?" I said, "Yes, I had so much fun, but it's going to be a whole year until I have another birthday, and so I'm miserable." Yeah? Because, you know, there is this awareness that, yes, you had a great time, but when it's over, so what? Yeah? What do you get out of it in the end? Okay? So, yeah, so I've always had that perspective. I never understood that story. It struck me as quite odd. Because my way of, if I were that person, you know, and this is the version that I later heard, you know, in the Tibetan tradition, is you're hanging there. I mean, the monster is like, you know, ignorance, and you fall off the cliff, you know, you're into impermanence. The mouse, you know, with the holding onto the branch is, you know, the wrong conception of thinking everything's stable and secure, and the mouse eating it is like, no, it's not secure. And the strawberry is the pleasures are the pleasures of samsara. You know, all the happiness you can get from samsara. And the way that the Tibetan told it is, if you're in that situation hanging onto that branch, watching that mouse eat it, and you just fell off the cliff, yeah, who cares about the strawberry? Yeah, it's like, if I'm going to fall down to the bottom of that ravine, I have to prepare my mind. Yeah, a strawberry is not going to help me. I have to prepare my mind and have a mind of compassion and a mind of wisdom and understand the nature of reality and not be attached to my body, not be attached to anything in cyclic existence. And when I go out of this life, go out of it with compassion and a bodhicitta motivation. And that's what I always thought the meaning of the story was. So I was very comforted finally when I found somebody else who thought like I did, because I really couldn't get it. Yeah. Okay. So, you know, we've been talking a lot about impermanence in these two chapters, and this is how it, you know, although we've been debating, you know, can this be permanent, can that be permanent, the whole purpose is really to apply it to our lives. And how does an awareness of momentary change, you know, how can we use it to affect our lives in a good way so that our lives become meaningful? And we don't spend our time holding on to things that are transient, hoping, wishing, clutching, clinging to them, thinking that there's got to be some way to make them stable and permanent, when there's absolutely no way at all to make that happen. Yeah? So it's kind of like, yeah, well, if you're falling in empty space, how to relax and enjoy it. Yeah? Instead of going, ah! When you can't, you know, when you're falling in empty space, what are you going to hold on to? Yeah, you only have your own mind. So, Okay, so we'll continue talking about impermanence in this chapter and see if we can relate it a little bit to our lives. So we're almost at the end of chapter 10, around verse 248. So here Aryadeva says, even if the self exists, form is seen to arise from other causes, to continue by virtue of others, and to disintegrate through others. Okay, so, if some of these non-Buddhist schools say that the self is permanent, or that there's a permanent creator, some permanent deity or permanent substance or permanent universal mind or something like that, out of which everything comes. If you say that, then such a thing is totally unsuitable to be something that actually is a cause that makes something happen. Yeah? Okay? So, here in this verse, we can see that even if there were a permanent self, which there isn't, but even if there were, a form like, colors and shapes and trees and plants and bodies and planets and all these things, okay, such a self can't be a cause of all these things that we see around us, because that kind of self or that kind of creator is something permanent, or that kind of universal substance is something permanent, and permanent things cannot be an initiating cause that makes something else arise, because in Buddhism the definition of permanent is not changing moment to moment. Okay? And clearly acting as a cause to make something else come into existence, something's got to change. Yeah, you can't have everything be exactly the way it was before and something change. It's like the cause, you have to have an initiating cause that changes and becomes the result, and when the result arises, the cause no longer exists. Okay? In other words, the cause has to go out of existence for the result to arise. Yeah? So, if you plant a seed, the seed has to cease before the plant or the sprout can arise. Okay? Now, somebody's going to say, well, but wait a minute. You have a tree, and a fruit grows out of the tree, but you still have the tree after the fruit grows. So the tree is permanent. No. The tree has changed since the time before it had the fruit and after it had the fruit. Yeah. There's what we call a continuum of similar type. So, in the previous moment it looked like a tree before the fruit came, and then after the fruit came it also looked like a tree. So it looked like the same thing. There's a similar type of phenomena there, but it's not exactly the same. Okay? So, sprouts arise from seeds. Our sense organs arise from earlier moments in the stages of development of, when we were a fetus. And the sprouts continue and the sense organs continue, and everything continues even though it doesn't remain the same in the next moment due to other causes and conditions. So it's not like one cause starts something and then after that nothing else influences it. It's not like you got your battery going and now it goes by itself. It's anything that arises, it needs other causes and conditions to continue to exist. And while it's continuing, it's also changing in every moment, not remaining the same. Yeah. So we're always so surprised when we look in the mirror and there's an old face in it, or at least an older face. Yeah, because somehow it's like, well, yeah, I was born, and then I'm supposed to kind of be permanent and the same for a while. And then old age somehow miraculously happens to everybody else, but somehow I'm going to escape it. Yeah? And then you look in the mirror and it's like, who is that person? And you take out your passport from 10 years ago, and you look at your passport from 20 years ago. I still have my passport from 20 years ago. There's change. Okay. And that's just part of the whole thing. But that change happened due to other causes and conditions. So at every single moment of our existence, we're dependent on causes and conditions. We are not some kind of independent, self-enclosed, self-instituting, thing that can control everything. Yeah? Much as we like to think we are, actually, in fact, we aren't. Yeah? Okay, so if there were a permanent self or a permanent creator, then it would be the cause of everything and without changing in itself. And it would also be the cooperative conditions that kept something going for a period of time, again, without changing. And that's impossible. Yeah, because to be a cause or a condition means you influence something else and you are influenced by other things, so you don't remain the same in the next moment. Okay? So then verse 249, just as the sprout, which is a product, is produced from a product, the seed, similarly all that is impermanent comes from the impermanent. Okay? So a sprout, is a product. It's something that's been produced. And it comes from its cause, its substantial cause is the seed. And the seed, too, is something that's produced. Yeah, the seed isn't some kind of something that appeared without any cause. Yeah, it came into existence due to causes, and because of that itself, its nature is impermanent, and it produces effects. Okay, so effects arise only from impermanent things. They can't arise from permanent things like a permanent self or some kind of universal permanent substance that we are all part of and merge with when we die. It's a New Age concept, but it actually existed in ancient times too. And it sounds really good. It's very comforting. Yeah? There's this permanent substance, and I came out of it, and I merge with it, being one afterwards. Sounds good. But it's impossible for that kind of thing to happen. And if you really thought about it, if you merged with something that were permanent, then you would never change again. So you would be frozen in time. Does that sound like a happy ending? Okay. So each thing that is produced depends on causes and conditions to be produced. It itself, its nature, is that it doesn't exist in the next moment in the same way as it does in this moment. But when it ceases to, when it arises, it's different in the next moment. Yeah, So it's disintegrated from the moment in which it arose. But there's a continuum to it. It didn't go totally out of existence. So even though things are changing moment by moment, when they cease, they don't totally cease in the sense of not having a continuum of anything whatsoever. They may not have a continuum of a similar type, because you can have the tree, and moment to moment, one tree produces the next tree, so you have a continuum of a similar type. But if the tree burns down, you don't have a tree after that. But that doesn't mean that the tree you had went totally out of existence without any continuum whatsoever. There was a continuum, because at least in terms of the material continuum, you have the ashes, you have the heat that went out, you had the light, there's some kind of continuum there, okay? So it didn't totally go out of existence. I think scientists say the same thing, don't they? Equals MC2, the whole idea that mass and energy can go back and forth and you never, ultimately lose anything. So it's the same kind of idea here, okay? So things always have a continuum, even though they may not be a continuum of the similar type to what it was before. Yeah, but the continuum is always somehow, it's an effect of the cause, so it has to be related to the cause. So for example, when a person dies, the body has its continuum, the body's material, so the body, if you bury the body, then the worms have lunch, and it, decays, and, it has that continuum. If you cremate the body, then it turns into the ashes. But there's some kind of continuum. So similarly, our consciousness at the time of death also has a continuum. It doesn't completely cease into total nothingness and non-existence. But it gives rise to another moment of clarity and awareness. Clarity and awareness being the essence or the definition of what consciousness is. So there's always that kind of continuity. Then verse 250, since functional things arise, there is no discontinuation, and because they cease, there is no permanence. Okay? So when something disintegrates and it produces something else, okay, so that is a functional thing arising, the cause disintegrated, the result arose. Okay, so when it says since functional things arise, you have the sprout arising out of your seed. So there's no total discontinuation of the seed. The seed itself ceases, but there is a continuation of the seed. Okay, so because things arise, then there's no annihilation. Sometimes we talk about the two extremes, one being permanence, one being annihilation. So because something new arises in the next moment from everything that exists, that functions, therefore there's no discontinuation. So there's no annihilation of things. And because then the last two lines, and because they cease, there's no permanence. So because all these functioning things cease, they aren't permanent, they aren't static, they don't remain the same in the next moment. Okay? So this is really something to think about. Because so easily we fall into either the extreme of permanence or annihilation. Somebody died, they don't exist at all. There's nothingness. It's the extreme of annihilation. Yeah, not seeing that when you have an impermanent thing, there is a continuation. Yeah, yeah, and similarly, seeing that when that everything that arises does cease, so nothing kind of arises and then remains static forever. That's really helpful to remember in our life. If nothing remains static, then how is that going to influence how you live your life and what you do and what decisions you make? How is that going to influence your whole idea of what life is about? Yeah? Remember the fairy tales we grew up hearing? And they always ended, with the prince and the princess getting married and living happily ever after. Yeah? And so that's what we were brought up to believe in, that the culmination is getting married, and after that nothing changes. Yeah? I mean, they live happily ever after, so there's nothing more to write about. It's boring somehow. It's like, okay, now everything's permanent. But as we know, life continues after the marriage. Life continues after anything you do. And it's changing. Yeah, all the time changing. Sometimes people have what I call ordination fever. They want to ordain as a monk or a nun immediately. They've got to ordain immediately. And I say, and what are you going to do the day after you ordain? They never thought about it. What do you do the day after you ordain? As if, again, you get ordained, then everything's permanent. Okay? So to really think about this and, how change permeates our life and how our mind needs to adapt to that reality. Because we usually fight the reality of change. Unless it's a change we want. If it's a change we want, then it's good. Yeah. If it's a change we didn't want, then we fight it and we say that can't possibly happen and it can't be. Yeah? Right? Isn't that true? Yeah? We've all had changes that we've wanted and it's like, oh, finally that changed. Fantastic. Unaware that other people are going, what happened? Yeah. But we wanted the change, so we don't care about the fact that they didn't, and we're just happy afterwards. And then other times, we're not the person who wanted the change, and the change happened, and then we're miserable. Okay? So how can we learn to be okay with changes, whether we want them or not? How can we not get elated when it's a change we want and not feel dejected when it's a change we don't want? Yeah. His Holiness talks a lot about that, He says, well, my life doesn't have so many ups, but it doesn't have so many downs either. It's more like this, and that's okay. Okay. Okay, so that verse that we just read, since functional things arise, there is no discontinuation, so no annihilation, and since they cease, there is no permanence. So that is showing briefly how permanence and annihilation are avoided in terms of the conventional. Now we might go, wait a minute, I thought those two extremes always pertain to the ultimate. Yeah. If we're talking about emptiness, then the two extremes are inherent existence and total non-existence. Here, regarding the conventional, the two extremes are not changing moment to moment, or there not being a continuity after it ceases. So it's a little bit different. Okay, so since results like sprouts arise and are produced, there's no danger that the cause, a seed, will be totally annihilated. Okay, and the seed ceases when the sprout arises, so there's no danger of the seed being permanent. And so, Treatise on the Middle Way says, whatever has arisen depending on something is firstly not one with it. It is also not separate from that. Thus, there is no discontinuation and no permanence. Okay, so this is Nagarjuna. Yeah. So, any effect that arises from a cause is not inherently one with the cause. Okay? If it were inherently one with the cause, then the cause and the effect would be exactly the same thing, and they would exist at the same time. If the effect were one with the cause, then they're both there at the same time. Can a cause and its effect exist at the same time?
No.
No. Okay.
You wouldn't need the cause if the effect was already there.
Yeah. If they existed at the same time, then you don't need a cause to have the effect. Yeah. So then anything could produce the effect, because that cause wasn't necessary. Yeah, so then you would have just chaos, because anything could produce the effect because you don't need that cause. And if the cause were still there even after the effect came into existence, then even if the cause did produce the effect, since it was still there even after the effect came into existence, then it would keep producing effects again and again and again. Yeah. That sounds like knapweed, doesn't it? I don't know about this verse. Maybe knapweed contradicts it. Yeah? Seems like that, doesn't it? Yeah? There's a cause, and you get the effect, and you pull out that plant, and you walk by the next day, and there's another knapweed plant there. Yeah? Did it come from the same cause? No. Okay. So the previous seed went out of its existence in producing that plant. Another seed came into existence. Okay, so now you only have
2,000 seeds.
Yeah. Yeah, 3 million seeds actually. Yeah. Okay. So, so the cause and effect can't exist at the same time. Yeah. So whatever has arisen depending on something is firstly not one with it. That can't be, it doesn't work if cause and effect are exactly the same. Yeah. And it is also not totally separate and unrelated. So it's not that the cause and the effect are totally separate, unrelated things. Because if they were, then you could plant grapefruit seeds and get plastic trees, and you can, everything, again, would be totally chaotic because there would be no relationship between the cause and its effect. Okay, so, what we see in this whole law of cause and effect is that a concordant effect arises from a cause. Yeah, or to focus on the effect is produced by a concordant cause. In other words, the cause and its effect have to have to be in accord with each other. Yeah, so that when you plant roses, you get roses, and when you plant chili, you get chili. Yeah. Otherwise, if they weren't in accord with each other, then things would be pretty nutty, wouldn't they? Yeah. I mean, but you can see sometimes we almost think as if causes and effect don't relate to each other. Yeah. I cannot study and ace my exam. We've thought like that, haven't we? Yeah. It usually doesn't work. Yeah. The cause has to go with the effect. I can create non-virtue and live happily ever after. No. Yeah. So, there has to be a relationship between cause and effect. And that is really important to see, Although the cause goes out of effect, the cause ceases, I should say, when the effect arises. Yeah. It's got to produce something that it's capable of producing. It can't just produce anything. Yeah. And so that's the whole thing, when you're a parent and you raise your kids, what are you teaching your kids? If you want this kind of thing to happen in your life, create these kind of causes. Yeah, isn't it? Isn't that what you teach your kids? Yeah, if you want people to like you, share your toys and don't throw sand. Yeah? So, it's like pleasant results come from good causes and unpleasant results come from, harmful causes. Okay? So a cause isn't something permanent that turns into effect. So it's not that at its core a seed is permanent, but superficially it changes. Remember we were talking about this last week? Like, I'm permanent. Yeah, in general, there's part of me that's permanent, but then there's all these other parts of me that change. But in general, I don't change. Yeah? You feel like that sometimes? Yeah? I'm just the same person. Yet, yeah, I've changed. But, yeah, so I'm permanent and impermanent at the same time. Totally sensical. If you're stupid. Okay. So, any effect that arises depending on a specific cause is not inherently separate from that cause. Because if it were, then the effect could arise endlessly, because the arising of the effect would not depend on the cessation of the cause, because they're totally separate. Yeah? In that case, too, anything could arise from anything, because nothing would need to change in order to produce the effect. Okay, so it's coming, back again here, repeating the major conclusions for us to remember. So thus, there's no discontinuation of the causes continuum due to an effect arising from the cause, though there can be, the continuation may not be of a similar type. Okay, and through the reasoning of dependent arising, the effect is seen as neither inherently one with the cause, because then they would be exactly the same, or inherently different from the cause, because then they would be unrelated. Okay, thus the cause is free from the defects of permanence and discontinuation. So this is, if you remember this, it's really, really helpful, because later on we get into what's called the diamond slivers reasoning, that really investigates how things arise, how effects are produced, and we go through a lot of these reasonings again. So if you remember some of this, then it helps, when you get to the gardening class called Diamond Slivers. Okay, we do a lot of gardening in Madhyamaka philosophy. Okay. Okay, and then there's a summarizing stanza that says, through familiarity with meditating on the impermanence, nature, unsatisfactory nature, and uncleanness of samsara, abandon the limitless views of the self, both innate and those imputed by tenets. 4 lines with a whole lot packed into them. Okay? So, through abandoning familiarity with meditating on the, through abandoned familiarity, it should be by meditating on. What's meditating on? Anyway, you meditate by or with. You meditate on impermanence. Okay? And so that cuts through. If we develop familiarity with doing that, then we abandon the mind that clings at permanence by meditating on impermanence. Okay? And that really helps us to give up a lot of our clinging and attachment, because if things are changing moment to moment, why, try and hold on to them? It's like sand falling through your fingers, You can grasp as much as you want, but you're not going to be successful in holding it. Yeah. So meditating on that. So that was our first chapter in the text, wasn't it? Yeah. Meditating on the unsatisfactory nature of things in cyclic existence. That there is no lasting happiness, that whatever happiness we experience, the situation that made us happy, if we keep doing that situation, we're going to stop feeling happy and we're going to start feeling miserable. Like if you keep eating, then you get a tummy ache. Yeah. When you first water ski, it's fun, but if you have to water ski 24 hours a day, it's a drag. Okay? So unsatisfactory nature. So that was second chapter, right? And then the uncleanness of samsara. So specifically our body. We think body is beautiful, but if the body is so clean, well, how come we have to wash it so often? And how come everything that comes out of it we consider rather foul? Okay, so that was the third chapter in the book. So through familiarity with meditating on impermanence, the suffering nature and uncleanness of samsara, okay, so counteract the wrong views that grasp at permanence, pleasure, and purity, and abandon the limitless views of the self. Yeah, both innate and those imputed by tenets. So innate ones are ones that are come along with us from previous lives, and ones imputed by tenets are ones that we acquire in this life by studying wrong philosophies or psychologies, and so learning wrong views. And when it says here, the limitless views of the self, as we've been going through these chapters, the people have been studying this book, we come up with one view after another one, don't we? Yeah, there's this character in the book, Kachik, remember, who we renamed Joe Blow, who is full of questions. One wrong view question after another wrong view question. The mind being very creative. So, saying abandon all those limitless wrong views. Okay, so after these two chapters, recent chapters, where we've been dealing a lot with impermanence, then chapter 11, okay, is an individual refutation of truly existent functional things. Okay, by refuting truly existent time. Okay, so talking about impermanence, which is talking about time. Now we're going to get into exactly what does time mean, and how time is not truly existent, and how it also is not permanent. Okay, and this chapter will get you good and confused. Yeah, it's a lot of fun, but it's also very confusing until you get it. Okay, so we have a little bit of time. I thought to start the next chapter next week, give you some time to reflect on time. Any questions or comments? Yeah.
Is the substantial cause of a Buddha or clear knowing nature of the mind?
Is the cause?
Substantial cause of a Buddha.
Okay, so the substantial cause, you can't say of a Buddha, but the substantial cause of the Buddha's omniscient mind, yeah, would be the clear and knowing mind. Yeah, because you just have that continuity of clarity and awareness, which before the attainment of enlightenment was covered by defilements, but after the attainment of enlightenment is free from those defilements. Okay, so the Buddha's mind is also impermanent. Okay, so impermanent in the sense that it changes moment by moment. And it makes sense because if a Buddha's mind is perceiving all phenomena, since phenomena change moment by moment, then if you're going to perceive them, that consciousness has to change moment by moment too. Okay, so don't think of there being a permanent, unchanging Buddha mind. Because a permanent mind can't perceive anything. Yeah? Yeah, think of it. If there's a permanent mind that doesn't change, then any object could be in front of that mind and it wouldn't perceive it. Yeah, because to perceive something, the mind changes, doesn't it?
And what would be the substantial cause of the body?
From the sutra viewpoint, the substantial cause of the Buddha's body would be, they don't talk substantial cause, the cause would be the collection of merit. From the tantric viewpoint, it's the extremely subtle mind. Wind, yeah, I'm sorry. And from the tantric viewpoint, the substantial cause of the omniscient mind would be the extremely subtle mind. And of the form body of the Buddha, this extremely subtle wind. Okay? Yeah. Both of which we have right now. Extremely subtle mind and extremely subtle wind. So that's good news. Yeah? We have the substantial cause that can become a Buddha's body and mind.
What happens when Buddhas change?
Well, the Buddha's mind changes, okay? But once you've arrived at Buddhahood, the state of Buddhahood, you never fall down to be a sentient being again. Because all the defilements have been eliminated, and there's no cause that can make that mind have defilements once the defilements have been severed from the root.
So then there are no causes for change?
No, there's no causes for defilements. But change, like I was saying, the Buddha's mind is omniscient. So since what it sees is changing all the time, it has to change all the time. And a Buddha is acting, to be of benefit for sentient beings. So that involves change, doesn't it? Okay, but a Buddha never stops being a Buddha. Yeah, because there's no cause that can make the state of Buddhahood go out of existence. Okay. else?
That's another question.
Yeah.
Okay. People weren't here yesterday, but just to pose the question. So we heard this teaching about the Buddha setting precepts. And he was changing the precepts all the time to get them right. But so in one sense, you could say, well, he's omniscient. Why wouldn't he know how just to set it the first time? Then I was thinking about that, because the first one we heard that one story was like, it seemed odd to me a little bit. And then I was thinking about, wow, the conditions he's in. It seemed like a skillful way to like bring other people up to the bar. You know, like, so how does a Buddha know? Does this make sense to you where I'm kind of going with?
Yeah. The thing is, yeah, something happens, you know, so the Buddha makes a precept, then something else happens, so he revises it, something else happens and he revises it, something else happens and he revises it. Then finally you get to the precept, and after that the Buddha passed away, so that precept wasn't changed anymore. So you're asking, how come he didn't just set it down in the way it was going to finally be at the beginning? Because the way it finally was wouldn't suit the situation that happened at the beginning.
The causes weren't there.
Yeah, it's like all those things had to come together and the people had to change.
And the situations had to change. So because of the continual change, then you got the continual modification of the precepts. Okay, if you say, oh, well, the Buddha was an omniscient, so he should have known that the precept would end up being like that. So why doesn't he just say that at the beginning? Because if he said that at the beginning, it wouldn't fit the situation, and the people would go, what's he talking about?
Sort of creator God thinking too. Putting down the commandment as opposed to all the causes and conditions that are bringing about the precept itself.
Yeah. So very much in the development of the monastic code, you know, you see causes and conditions playing out all the time. Yeah. And the importance of being receptive to those. Or receptive to the changes, I should say. Okay. Yes?
Well, it's just big, this impermanent thing.
Yeah, it is. This impermanent thing is big. And when you really think about it, you know, something inside shakes, and you can't keep looking at things exactly the same as you did before. It doesn't work anymore. So initially, you know, as we start to change, even though we're changing moment by moment, you know, so actually, since we're changing moment by moment, we might as well change in a good way.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, and we might as well direct our energies in a good way, since we're changing and there's no way to stop it anyway. Okay, but you know, it can initially seem a bit like, oh, I thought I was standing on firm ground and I'm not. Well, what's happening is we were never standing on firm ground. It's just now we're realizing that. So actually, nothing's changed in our situation. The external situation hasn't changed. It's just our mind has, like, oh, now I see it for what it is.
And equally disturbing as you see all the places that your mind's still getting caught.
Yes.
Oy.
Yes. How our mind still gets caught, and how we repeatedly try to concretize everything.
Flail, because it's not the way it is.
Yeah, and get so mad at reality.
If things aren't annihilated, if annihilation is accurate, karmic seeds ripen or purified. Where do they go? Or where does they go?
Well, the seed gives for, you know, gives you know, it ripens into the result that's experienced. Okay?
The negative karma can be purified.
If it's purified, then what you're doing is actually, you know, the karmic seed, or if you're talking from the prasangika viewpoint, you get into this whole thing of the having ceased of the action, which is really fun. Right, Guy? Yeah. Yeah, the shikpa and the shikpa of the shikpa.
Yeah.
And the shikpa of the shikpa of the shikpa. Yeah, it's, oh, now I lost my train of thought. My thought got annihilated. Tell me your question again. Yeah.
Where
does it go?
Oh yeah, where does it go? Okay, so yeah, so the karma that ripens, see, the karma is not some kind of material thing.
Right.
So it's not like, okay, here it is and there it's gone. So we may use the vocabulary of a karmic seed, but a seed isn't something material. Okay? And this jikpa, this having ceased, also isn't something material. So you can't say, where does it go?
I see.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes there's one sutra that gives the analogy of like karma going from one life to the next, of having a seal and you stamp the seal in the wax. Okay? So what actually happened when you stamped the seal in the wax? Did something go from the, no, yeah, did something go from the seal into the wax? No, there's nothing there. Something happened, but there was no physical thing that you can point to and say, oh, that went from the seal into the wax. Because all you have is that imprint. Yeah, but what's an imprint? Yeah. Okay.